Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am A. Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or review the show on your favorite platform. We truly appreciate your feedback and would be honored if you shared the podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Today, my guest is Doug Katz. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Why don't you start us off just telling me a little bit about yourself?
All right, my background. I grew up in Michigan, attended the United States Military Academy at West Point, served as an artillery officer until 98, got out of the military, kind of did the corporate thing for a while, ended up most recently in lending for a couple of decades, but have now kind of wanted to do more with my third act. I have been fortunate in resources and where I live, and now I develop products for the adaptive space. That's the Nulu brand you can see in my title as well. Our first product being an adaptive knife, and built a team of great people. And looking forward, we just successfully completed our Kickstarter, which was a great milestone. So we're really looking forward to going to market in the spring.
Awesome. My first question for you is, what is your definition of inclusion?
And that's how we were talking in the green room before this, and I was happy to hear this as a question, because we look at able-bodied and disabled, if you will, differently. So in the context of like how we design, we've moved away from a binary model, and we've created what we call the ability curve. And the ability curve is based on a scale instead of a binary model. And as a result, we're looking at a more inclusive model of designing for the adaptive space, because in reality, the ability to accomplish a task, regardless of age and everything, is sort of the definition of whether you are able-bodied, right? It harkens back to my military time, where we were evaluated on a task under certain conditions and standards, and it was sort of pass fail. And I'm not saying it should be that draconian with anything, but in terms of evaluation, if we understood it differently, I think people tend to look at disabled as chronic, or like a condition you were born with or that you got from an accident, as opposed to a temporary disability, or
Right.
just looking at it as a challenge or an inability to do a particular task. So we've created this model because when we were starting to look at the knife, the Nulu, we were in a situation where we knew it worked, but we're like, okay, how do you size the market? And we sized it by looking at symptomatic manifestation of either a chronic disease, an injury, or age. A young child, and I'll use 7, let's say, is less able to accomplish a task in the kitchen. They are disabled by our definition. So when we look at things that way, it's easier to think more inclusively, because people don't think, okay, I got to throw in the towel, because if I'm not able-bodied, I'm disabled, and if I'm disabled, I'm this classification that sometimes has a pejorative feeling to it. I don't know.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I like how you reframe it. That's an interesting way to think about it, for sure. I'm not sure if you already said this, but what got you into the space designing?
Well, I'm a disabled vet, and I'm a hobbyist. I love to do things. I figure if you're here, you might as well enjoy being here. And I was fortunate enough. One year, my wife got me a handmade, beautiful knife, and the gentleman who was the craftsman also had classes. So one thing led to another, and my son and I took one of his classes. And around the time that we did that, I was moving. My father, who was 80, I think 87 at the time, had moved up here, and we were relocating further away from the city. And we wanted to just move him in with us because it was going to be a better setup. And I was lucky enough to end up with a workshop. And so I really took the knife making to heart, and I started making a lot of knives. But I also am a chef, a home chef. I like to make food. Had a really
Mhm.
bad flare up. I just got my shoulder rebuilt last year, and was playing around in my shop. I couldn't swing a hammer, so I had some scrap metal sitting around. I had a circular saw blade, and I started playing around with that and kind of thinking in terms of another proprietary term that we use called force transfer geometry. And I started thinking about, like, I do martial arts, or at least I did before my shoulder. I'm going to go back to it hopefully, but that a lot of that is about like transfer of force, right? And for somebody who's got a challenge or a disability, when you're doing a test like cutting, it's all about efficient transfer of force. You need to make the most of what you have. So came up with a really rudimentary model of where we've gotten to now, and it worked. And that's kind of how I ended up doing it. And as my team and I have moved down the road of development and commercialization, I think we've become even closer to the market because we understand it better. We started to really look at it and go, well, wait a minute, it just works, but let's figure out why it just works. Well, okay, let's figure out who it's the most beneficial to. That's who we need to get it to, because really, in our model, this ability curve model, age is a disability in some regards. You're never going to be stronger than within sort of bands. You're gonna get less strong. You're gonna get less dexterous, and you're gonna have less coordination, and it's just how it is. So that kind of really opened our world, especially, as I said, my dad was living with us and he was in his late 80s, and he was always pretty avid in the kitchen cook, and I could see that, right? So once I started to connect the dots, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's great. Do you watch Forged in Fire?
I do. And really funny story.
Okay.
um when I'm a much better inventor than a knife maker, but I was getting very discouraged. So I started watching Jason Knight's videos. He was one of the judges on the first couple of seasons.
Okay.
And when we started commercializing the Nulu, I was like, what the hell? I'm going to reach out to him. Seems like a nice guy. Nicest guy on earth, super supportive of
Awesome.
veterans. One thing, because
Okay.
he just loves veterans, but just super supportive and wanted nothing in return. It was like he's like, cool knife, gave me a ton of great advice. So
That's cool.
at least he, as one of the guys on there, really does put his money where his mouth is, and was just super cool guy. I don't watch as much, unfortunately, now that I'm so knee deep in Nulu.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to do much in my shop, and I'm trying to make like a pact with myself that I'll make one traditional knife a month,
Okay.
because I think I don't want to get away from what I love about knives.
Right.
And some of the things about regular knives that make them anachronistic with comparison to the Nulu in the kitchen are still fun, right? There's still like this visceral connection to knives that
Yeah.
I think people have. So it's still fun to make them.
Yeah, been watching it for a while, but I watched a bunch of it because my background is my grandpa and dad started a welding shop back in the 70s. So I grew up on welding and metal and stuff. So I think that's probably part of it, but it's fun to watch like them taking like the metal and creating a knife with it and testing it and stuff. So it's pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, you can get started like pretty inexpensively if you're
Yeah.
handy, especially. Like I was lucky because the my mentor gave me a lot of his equipment at a really good
Oh,
price.
sure.
But aside from the forge, and a lot of people build their own, you could really start with, everyone tells you you need a certain kind of belt grinder. It's true, but you could easily go to Harbor Freight, buy three different sizes of belt grinder, and
Right.
get a feel whether you like it, and you'd probably be into it for $500, right?
Right.
Like that's where the Nulu itself was kind of like all created initially on a lot of Harbor Freight stuff because of the angles. I needed a tighter grinder than my
Okay.
my 4x72 or 2x72. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Is Nulu stand for something, or how did you come up with that name?
Well, so it's sort of made up, but there is a knife called the Ulu. And the Ulu, if you ever know anybody who was either military stationed in Alaska or who went on an Alaskan cruise, they
Yep.
probably came back with an Ulu. And an Ulu is a very traditional Inuit,
Yep.
um, uh, um, indigenous knife of that area.
This is a
And
skinning knife.
it was it was the woman's knife. It was
Okay.
called the everything knife, and um, it made sense, right? It was sort of like this all-purpose, exceptionally efficient knife where you could cut a kid's hair, you
Right.
could, take the skin off an animal. It was just a really, really well designed knife, but I think sort of happenstance design. So
Right.
when we created the Nulu, we looked and we said it's got the benefits of the Ulu, but we sort of reverse engineered the Ulu and looked and said, well, wait a minute, why does it work well? And I think people intuitively are like, okay, well, it's just better transfer. Well, then we said, like, let's take it to the next level. And even our patent is based on sort of more cutting surface and more flexibility of use.
Okay. That's
So
awesome.
new Ulu is the
There you
Nulu.
go. Well, as soon as you said Ulu, I'm like, I feel like there must have been a Forge and Fire episode where they made one because that name sounded familiar to
It's a
me.
good question. I don't know if there is one where they made that. I actually do not know.
I mean, I'm wondering if there was because I don't know where else I would have heard of it, honestly. But I don't know. That's what my
They
brain
make
does. I'll
some
set
really
down the rabbit
beautiful,
trail of
gorgeous ulus, and it really is like when people use it, they're like, "Wow, this is the best thing ever."
right,
And that's where we've taken it to a different level. Um, And what's funny is because of the way we've gone from a design perspective, it's hugely flexible. So we say it's the knife that adapts to you because of the cutting surface and the way it's used. It has the most flexibility of use for the best transfer for the individual, which is why for people with challenges or disabilities, it's a better option. Um, but manufacturing was tough. Like even like Jason Knight, the guy from Forge and Fire, was like, "You're going to have to get this made overseas because it's going to be a very difficult grind." And that's where we've gone to is so. The Ulu itself was kind of an easy knife to manufacture. I think
right,
for the indigenous people, they would make it out of, I believe, some like scrap metal that was used, hardenable steel. But you could make it. It has sort of a center post where ours we have it's done from the side, so it's a little bit
right.
different. Like I actually have one here, so you can see
Okay,
it's connected here versus
right.
in the center the way an Ulu would.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I think I have seen it because yeah, it kind of goes out, doesn't it? Kind of goes
Yep.
out.
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
I've seen one somewhere. Gotcha. So like, what's the price point on it? How much does
Going
it cost?
to market, it's going to be just under $70.
Okay.
Which it's and this has been sort of the hard philosophy that people have had to get over, right? Because they're used to going to Walmart and they see a
Yeah.
chef's knife there. And the thing that's cool about the Ulu or the Nulu is that it replaces, 4 or 5 knives in the kitchen, right? So, you can cut this way, you can chop, you can cut this way, you can chop this way, you can cleave, but you can also um, precision cut this way. So it really does what three or
Yeah.
four at least knives would in your kitchen. And because of the manufacturing difficulties, we got to be in that $60 range. But I'm sorry. It's a little bit of a bear to manufacture. We are hoping very soon also to have some other handle options. That's going to be a lot of where our roadmap and our development goes.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is just like I have a daughter, 22, with a disability, and she has like a wheelchair, power wheelchair, and she's had like an adaptive bike in the past, and like anything, if you put the word like adaptive on it, the price point is ridiculous. Like her
Yep.
three-wheel adaptive bike was like, thousands of dollars. And it's like, you look at it like that's literally taking like a Walmart bike and like cutting the back wheel off
You're
and making
right.
it two wheels. So like just that word adaptive seems to increase like the price point, for her, her assistive technology just ridiculously.
It is, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the way we're looking at it, right? We're looking at it from how do you squeeze the most value out of commercializing something, right?
Yep.
So I'm close to it from an adaptive perspective because it helps me out.
Yep.
But then what we're thinking is, okay, so we have our ability curve model where people are starting to understand that they're probably somewhere on there and need to start thinking about adapting to remain active, to remain in control of their diet and nutrition or whatever. So we think adaptive and then assistive. So who needs it and then who would benefit from it? And
Right.
actually, when we use our ability curve, wherever you are on that ability curve for that particular task, the lower that you are on there, the more that you need an adaptive product.
Right.
So the way we look at it, there's an inflection point from adaptive to assistive, and
Right.
in there, people benefit the most sort of on those lower levels, right? I mean, at the very lowest levels, there may be impaired to the point where our product may not be able to help. But
Yep.
then there's that inflection point. So if we can capture that whole market, really, there should be the ability to get the economy of scale to drive price down,
Yep.
but also to think differently. So Nulu actually is a subsidiary company of another entity that my partners and I are part of, called Red Leg Innovation. Our vision for that is a venture studio built around adaptive products. So as we learn how to better interface with all of the organizations that really are the key to visibility and awareness within the communities, right? Because there's this big gap. If you want to develop these products, you've got to get to the nonprofits, the government organizations, or
Right.
the individuals advocating like you, which isn't always easy. I think there's a healthy and understandable level of suspicion of carpetbagging, right? There's people who want to slap a ergonomic handle on something and say, hey, look what I made, and pay all this money for it.
Right.
We're trying to integrate those folks into our development cycle and get that information. In fact, there's a lot of the state adaptive offices that are currently evaluating Nulu or who have already evaluated it. And if we can systematize that, well, then we can bring other adaptive products to market and help somebody else maybe commercialize it too
Right.
by bringing that economy of scale. Because it's bringing products to market is difficult, especially when investors don't really understand the market, which has been our biggest challenge. That's partly why we did a Kickstarter. Every little bit helps, but generally, products are hard to get funded now, and adaptive products are really not high on people's. Hey,
Right.
here's what I'm going to throw a lot of money at.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, one of the concepts in the disability community that I hear a lot is like universal design. So why do you think like other knife manufacturers don't just automatically create like, knives that are more universally designed to be used by
It's a
more
great
people?
question, and I think knives are a little bit of a different ball game, right?
Okay.
Because if you're looking at like small craft, like you've got sort of the big players, and then you've got craft manufacturers, and you got some in the mid. It's almost like the beer, like microbreweries, and then regional brands. And the smaller guys, like you just couldn't make this efficiently as an individual and sell it from that price point. So
Right.
and there's something about a handmade traditional knife, right? That's their bread and butter.
Yeah.
When we went to the big manufacturers and we're like, hey, you want to license this? Like, what do you think? They're
Right.
like, we love it, right? There were a lot of really, really helpful guys in that world. But the way that large manufacturing is done, they're on very, very customized machines, many of which I guess are made out of Germany. So they were like, the machines that we have will not make this, not like there's just no way it will do what you need
Uh,
it to do. So for us, it was kind of a manufacturing challenge.
Okay.
And I think that's what holds up the knife folks, because they look and they say, we're selling a lot of traditional knives. No one's asking for this.
Right.
So you need a disruptor, right? And it killed us to have to look offshore, but it's just the way we had to go.
Right.
I think that anywhere else, right? Smart design, adaptive being smart design. I actually wrote a white paper on that recently. I just don't think people understand that market. And I think that when you talk to people about creating adaptive products, their mind immediately goes to, again, a binary model. How much money can there be in that? All the things that you've probably heard on why there isn't more development in that space. And I think that that can change. I think the gray tsunami is going to help. I think that, and one of the areas that we're really trying to push is in uh, age in place and senior tech, because as people do want to stay in their homes, the choice is figuring out a way to continue to thrive and be able to work in the kitchen, or order in, or eat a lot of processed food. So I think that adaptive in general will get way more accepted, partly because, as I said, you've got the gray tsunami, you've got age increasing where quality of life hasn't necessarily kept up.
Right.
And as that becomes a priority, then the money and a lot of the wealth is still concentrated in the older generations. They'll spend money to keep their independence. But you also have the caretakers who I think look at it from the view of anything I can do to keep somebody independent um, is time that I have to, like I look at I'm 54, kind of the sandwich generation, or the point of that spear. Well,
Right.
now you're juggling, right? Like I have a kid in high school and I was living with my 88-year-old dad. Well, if I can keep my dad independent, I can make it to every basketball game or whatever.
Mhm.
So I think that things like that will drive where the caretaker might be looking and saying, okay, I'm going to get this as a gift. But that group also hopefully is looking and saying, oh, you know what, they're that inflection point. They're starting to now age into our target market. And I'm hoping if we're successful, other people follow suit and look and say, well, wait a minute, it really makes sense to develop this way because good is good. It doesn't, it never ceases to amaze me where sometimes people look and they'll find like a great app and they're like, this is awesome. And it's really adaptive. It's just adaptive by another way of looking at it. But because they look like increasing their potential as opposed to making up for what they see as a shortcoming, the adoption rate is higher, even though it really is adaptive, right? It might be
Yeah.
adaptive in the way it makes your brain work
Right.
so that you can adapt to the flow of information, but it's adaptive. But they don't understand that, again, if you're on a continuum, there's no difference in the adaptive thinking,
Right.
right? So I was
Interesting.
getting kind of heady there. Sorry.
No, you're good. You might have talked about this a little bit, but in your opinion, what are some common misconceptions people have about adaptive products, and how can we shift the conversation to view them as essential,
I
empowering
think
tools?
it gets down to that anybody getting an adaptive product feels that they are somehow validating their decline. I think it's like people look and they're like, oh boy, and the way I look at it is like, what is the one thing that is like so impossible to get like an old guy to use is a walker, right? Like I will tell you, and it's right, but it's a good adaptive thing. And
Right.
um I hope that I never need one, but this is where I think people look and they're like, okay, this is a tangible representation of my mortality and my humanity, where I'm not going to be, because you have, God, I heard this thing recently. I don't even remember where I heard it, but when you look in a mirror, there's like an age that you stop aging in your own eyes, right? Like until you look at a mirror, it's like 40 or
Hmm.
35 or something, right?
Okay.
Well, I think that like anything that reminds you that that is not what you are is really, really
Yeah.
tough.
Right.
And I think if there was just more general acceptance and people were like, oh, here's the trade off, right? But so I do hope with things like our knife, though, that, and I'm going to think militarily here, is if we can start with the seniors and the sandwich part
Right.
and then move to the kids. And kids in the kitchen maybe don't know any different
Yep.
than this being a better knife. One, them being more open minded and not connected to something just because of its historic value, right? Blades are a weird thing too. Like there's connections in like having done martial arts and kind of gone down the studying sort of the samurai ethos a little bit. Like the connection to their blade was this like
Yep.
spiritual connection. Crusaders had the same thing. You know, you see chefs who like it's this whole ritualistic thing, you know, the knives and they open the knife thing. And
Yep.
so blades are a little bit different, but we're hoping that we can envelop sort of that middle part, right? Where kids look and all they know is they get to do stuff. And adults know that, hey, they get to keep doing stuff. The
Yep.
able-bodied ones are the ones that are the hard part. But I think if we get general acceptance of our approach to ability and disability, then somebody who, let's say, like me, who I still have elbow and hand issues, but my shoulder issues have been solved pretty well. I'm always going to have arthritis, but
Yep.
so I had my shoulder rebuilt. But for 18 months, I was out of commission in some way, shape, or form. There are younger people who I hope will look and say, for that period of time, I should do what I need to do to be the least impacted
Right.
because that builds better habits as you
Yeah.
age.
Yep.
So I think if that happens, then it will open the door more for, I didn't mean to rhyme there, for more thoughtful development of products for that space. And I will tell you, I wish more products that people throw together out of the disabled space could get commercialized because the degree of ingenuity and innovation
Right.
using off the shelf stuff from Home Depot that frankly much of it could be produced inexpensively. um, I think that the ability for that to open up a market would be really amazing because um, that could be a life-changing thing for somebody, right?
Right.
That could enable them to change their socioeconomic level or continue to thrive that way.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense what you said about like, yeah, you having to admit that you need help or you need, you have your abilities have changed. That is a huge part of it, the mental piece for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting because on the other side of it, everybody's always really willing to help, right?
Right.
Like if you know someone needs help, you're right there, and everybody's always really, really Johnny on the spot to tell you that you need the walker. But if you're like, hey, dude, you need a walker now. Oh, wait a minute, that's not
Right.
how that's right. So it's got to be a little bit of a code switch in people's head, and I
Yeah.
think that will happen, but I just don't know that there've been like I'm very zealous about it because I have my own disabilities.
Yep.
I've had some temporary ones, I have some permanent ones, and um, I'm also kind of the problem solving type thinker.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think if there was more of that, it would be great. Um, and maybe I'll inspire some folks. So who knows?
So I mean, you said you're a problem solver and a thinker like that. You mean how many other products do you have like in various stages after the
We've
new?
got a couple variations of the Nulu on the
Okay.
roadmap. And then I have two ones currently in development that have a little bit of an adaptive aspect to it. our actually whole product strategy is always adaptive, assistive, and adjacent.
Okay.
So if we find something that maybe isn't an adaptive product but can be commercialized, what we're hoping is if we find a good product like that and it's a home run, well, great, then we can
Right.
use that to
Yep.
help
Yep.
finance the other stuff. So there's a couple out there, but I have a friend who I played rugby with at West Point that invented a really cool rake that he took to market and just didn't have time for it right now. And I think it's a really good adaptive product. So we may license that from him. Again, as we're figuring out the system, we're hoping the product
Right.
becomes
Yep.
important but less important.
Yeah.
Um, and that we figure out, okay, like how do you bring this type of stuff to market and do it repeatedly well? If we can do that,
Yeah.
then let's face it, money is if someone's making money doing it, then other money will follow, and hopefully it will be profitable enough that other development stuff follows. Like that would be the best, right? More competition for adaptive products would be wonderful.
That'd be great. This just popped into my head. Have 3D printers like been a positive thing for like you think creating more?
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. So I'm actually looking at mine right now,
Okay.
and I call it my bat cave. I've got like a little workshop down here, and like a
Okay.
little area with like a TV and weight
Right.
room. Like so, it's my superhero lair. But it's interesting if you were to take AI, 3D printers, and inexpensive things like I was saying from Home Depot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Harbor Freight as an example. I think really what holds people back now is just a lack of confidence or people telling them that they can't do it. Um, the resources are there, right? When I started working on Nulu and some other things, the Google patent search thing is really it's so much better that you can go on the US government one. It's terrible, as expected. But the Google one is great. You could go through like a couple of hundred pages to see what prior art is out there, right? So then if you have an idea, boom, you can do that. And that shouldn't stop you. It just lets you know whether
Yeah.
one, you can patent it, and two, whether there's prior art that you need to work around. But
Yeah.
then being able to work in like softer wood or foam and 3D printing, the only thing I found with 3D printing is it's actually really hard. Like I was like, oh, you know what? It's like you have to kind of keep an eye on it, like to get good at it. It's like anything else. I got like an inexpensive one on Amazon, but what it did allow is I have the same one as my design partner,
Okay.
and what he could do, I had a bunch of the blade stand or the what are they the unsharpened, ungrinded blades.
Yep.
And so I could make those, and he was designing the handle, and he could send me the file, and I could print the handles.
Sure.
So the development cycle, like none of my team is located together. And I think technology to include like 3D printers have way enabled us to do a distributed architecture in that way. Now we're
Sure.
not shipping product yet. That will
Yep.
change, but I do think that especially for people who have an idea, adaptive or otherwise, find the resources. There's government resources to help. There's sometimes shared manufacturing workspaces where
Hmm.
if you need some type of really specific tool. But again, I found like for me, there's a couple of grinders like the Nulu, because of the way the blade is shaped, we did all the prototypes on a 4x24 grinder from Harbor Freight, which is like $90. Like it was
Right.
really
Yeah.
inexpensive. And most of the traditional knives I make, a lot of times I make them out of scrap steel
Yep.
and things like that, unless I'm really trying to make a beautiful one, because I just like to kind of goof off. So the resources are out there. It's just really finding them.
Yeah.
And I think I wish more people did it. I think we need more entrepreneurs in our country.
What is one tip you can share to help our listeners be more inclusive today? Just something simple that they can do that doesn't cost money to be more inclusive.
It's interesting. I became a way better person when I was doing work in the divorce space and I took a mediation class. The crux of which is understand all sides of the situation. And I think inclusivity, people throw woke and all kinds of other stuff out there, and it really just gets down to like, just be a respectful person.
Right.
And if you can understand someone else's side, then it's just easier to be respectful. And I think if people can think that way, then you can't help but be inclusive.
Yeah.
It's just kind of being kind of being kind. Um, the other thing I would say is you're gonna end up there yourself someday.
Mm.
Um, it's Father Time wins, and if it's been kinder to you and or your family members in every way, then you should really be counting your blessings and being working harder to make the lives of other people better. Like a lot of it, another thing that kind of framed my viewpoint on that, in my military experience, I never went anywhere. I went to Kuwait, but I was never in a war zone. I was in a hostile area, I guess that counted. But compared to what other people have been through, my stuff pales in comparison to it. And so I've spent a lot of time now volunteering within the veteran space, maybe overcompensating, but in a way that allows me to say, I was fortunate to never have dodged a bullet or had to shoot a bullet at somebody uh, in defense of the country or otherwise. And I served my time honorably, but I was very fortunate. I think if people think that way in terms of disabilities or anything, that if they haven't had to deal with it, then great. They should be even more out there trying to figure out how to lift other people up on that side. So it sounds kind
Right.
of, hopefully that wasn't overly cheesy, but
No.
what's very interesting for me is it's like anything else, right? It's like when you find out that you have um, a prejudice that you didn't think you had, and you're like, oh yeah, I guess I did have that.
Right.
Right? Like this journey with Nulu, like I think there's a lot of people who don't think of themselves as the disabled community, but stuff hurts when they wake up in the morning and they're not moving fast. And it's like, hey, I got news for you. You're part of that community.
Right.
Well, this journey and a creation of the ability curve for me gave me that insight and that ability to say, okay, well, crap, there's a heck of a lot more people around there
Yeah.
who should be inclusive because they're part of the community and not giving themselves credit for it.
Yeah.
So,
That makes a lot of sense. Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
no, just that the best way that anyone who is listening can help with inclusion and development in this space is help us out. Go to our social, follow us, subscribe. If you know somebody who our knife will benefit, get the information to them. Again, we're not yet taking pre-orders. We probably will be January, February timeframe. We just put in our purchase order. The first 1,000 knives will be here in early spring. But the success in this type of enterprise or others like it is 100% based on people buying it or people helping get the word out so other people can buy it. So that would be the best thing. NuluKnives.com is our main website. There's not that much there right now because we were heavily focused on the Kickstarter. They can still go there and see everything. And then for me, if people want to know more about me, I do have a link tree I could get to you that
Sure. Yep.
has my appearances. This appearance, when you get me the link, I'll put that on
Yep.
there. But I've done some writing of articles, some of the white papers I talked about, as well as links for anyone who'd want to do an evaluation, especially people associated with organizations that advocate for support the disabled community. but also investors or commercial kitchens. We didn't even talk about that. We are trying to also increase the pool of employment where people who have disabilities, who are aging into disability, can gain or maintain jobs in the culinary industry where otherwise they might not have been able to. We have an evaluation form for the professional commercial side as well that people can get at my link tree.
Awesome. Yeah, if you want to send that to me, I'll make sure I include all that stuff in the show notes when
Awesome.
it comes out. Ready for the last question?
I am. Lay it on me. That
Do
was
you like
ominous.
spam? Yes or no?
I actually have never had it. However, I'm going to say this. My daughter, uh, she's in her last year of the Coast Guard Academy, so she's getting around to a lot of different places.
Yep.
And this year she's got like this big spam. She's like really into spam. I am trying to eat less meat, at 54, anything I can do to help my health. But I may have her cook me some spam based on that question.
There you
So
go.
I will get back to you on that, on whether
Okay.
I'm a spam guy or not.
Sounds good. Yeah, I live in Austin, Minnesota, where they make spam and where the Spam Museum is located. So if you want to visit the
Oh,
Spam
wow.
Museum, you got to come
Is
to
that
Austin,
one word,
Minnesota.
spam museum?
No, two Spam Museum. Well, it's two words, I think. Spam
Museum
Museum,
of spam.
Museum. Oh, spam. Yeah. And if you go in there, they have somebody walking around with a tray with spamples on it, little chunks of spam
No
with
kidding.
little.
Sorry, but are you a spam guy?
I eat spam, but it's not like we eat it all the time. I mean, maybe once a year we'll fry it up and have it. It's not like
Okay.
not an everyday thing.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's kind of like Velveeta, right? Like, I don't like to admit I love Velveeta. Like, nothing melts like that. I know it's
Yeah.
terrible for you, right? But I'm gonna have to do
No.
spam and Velveeta. Maybe I'll do this. I will try spam and I will cut it with the Nulu.
Oh, there you go.
There you
That's
go. And then
there
that
you
will
go.
be one of the videos. My daughter actually is exceptionally good at producing them for me. So I'm super happy. I'm going to pick her up right after this. And I'll have to do a spam video now with
There
that.
you
And
go.
I will have to do a shout out because there's been a great interview. I've so enjoyed this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the show today. To all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inclusive Dad Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. Your feedback helps us connect with more champions of inclusion. Remember to share this podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.